The roll call shows that Councillor Osher, Councillor Gardner, Councillor Perry are here. And we have guests here. And the next item on the agenda is review of investment portfolio with the First National Wealth Advisors. So I'm not sure you want to introduce this, Sophie, or we go right to our wealth advisors.
So I guess I can just do a brief introduction. Everybody has seen Peter and Nazrin before. They've come in person to talk with us. And Lorraine and Nick have been also working on the portfolio. So with virtual, we get everybody. We get the whole team.
Nice.
The purpose of this meeting is to give council the opportunity to review the portfolio, to talk about investment strategies, to think about any changes or any questions you have. We'll let you know that Peter and Lorraine keep me abreast every month with a sub-accounting of how our portfolio is performing. So, and then we get the regular quarterly reports. So this we do once a year to make sure that council has an opportunity to talk with folks. And I don't know who I am passing it over to, so I'm going to pass it over to the first.
Great, and thank you all. It's so nice to see you. Thanks again for your time tonight. So please let us know if you have any questions. Nick and I are kind of co-managing the portfolios in this area, so we're actually two offices apart here. So feel free to ask us any questions. Has everyone seen the reports that we distributed the past couple of days? We'll start out on page 2 of that report, where it says Town of Orono on the top.
Yep.
We've got 2 portfolios that we're helping out with. One is the Town of Orono Reserve portfolio, and the other is the Cemetery Fund. So we'll dive into the Reserve portfolio on page 2. So you can see the pie charts there. You can see the asset allocation there as of the 16th for the Reserve portfolio. You've got about $1,044,000 there as of the 16th of February. So we've got about a 29% stock mix here for growth, 69% fixed income, also called bond allocation, and about 2% cash. So we're keeping the Reserve portfolio on our municipal reserve program, which tends to be around 25% stock. And that allows you for some growth, but some inflation protection. As it's hard to outpace the rate of inflation over the years with having all your funds in fixed income and cash. So as a result, we've got a small slice there in stock for you. You've done quite well with this. If you were to back this up a little bit, back to January of last year, you've got about 973,000. So you're up just about 7% over the past 13 months, going through a pandemic, in the middle of a pandemic. So, it speaks to, your discipline and also our high quality conservative approach. We've done really well with this. It's time that you stay in the markets as opposed to trying to timing the markets. That works out for municipalities, nonprofits, individual clients. That tends to be the theme. The key here, the key to risk management is how you approach rebalancing. You don't just set up a portfolio and let it go. You got to be proactive about taking gains when it doesn't necessarily feel right. You also have to be proactive about buying in the stocks when it doesn't feel good. An example of that was May of last year, after the stock market fell 35%. We decided to buy into the stock market around May of last year when everything was relatively inexpensive. So we're buying low. We want to trim high and lock gains for you. We just went through another rebalance process this year, locking in some gains on both the Reserve portfolio and the Cemetery portfolio. So it's buying low, trim high, trying not to time the stock market. In the middle, you can see that flow, that 29% stock allocation flowing through to your equities in the middle. Again, the key is diversification. One thing that sets us apart is our commitment to this. We always want to stay diversified. You've got 6 or 7 areas here, not only just in the US, but around the globe. You've got different shapes and sizes to your equities. We will change this dial once in a while. So it's never going to be stagnant and staying the same. We are proactive about changing this allocation up in terms of your equity diversification, making sure you're in the right markets, making sure we're spreading that risk out. That's really the key to success for you. It also alleviates the issue of trying to figure out what will perform well next year or the year after that. The next best thing is to have a diversified portfolio that spreads that risk out. We've had an incredible run in the US large company market. Last year, just US large growth companies were up 65, 70% in some cases. So, this year we've already taken some profit for you, locked in some gains in the large company space, and kind of reallocated money to other areas like US small companies, US mid-sized companies, and even international companies that stand to benefit in an environment like this. As the US economy, as the global economy continues to recover, you're going to start to see better performance, we anticipate, from small companies, mid-sized companies, and international. So you've got the allocation, the equity diversity, and the individual components and parts there. Nick, anything you want to add that I forgot?
Yeah. So just to really reiterate on what Pete was talking about with the rebalancing, one of the reasons we think that's so powerful, and I don't really want to jump around a lot, but if we go to the very last page, chart of the page 7, that really does help illustrate why we think the rebalancing is so powerful. And that is, there's a lot of factors in the market that are out of our control. So there's a lot of macro factors that are going to impact. For example, we've seen the last few days or the last week with energy prices going up because of storms in Texas. We have no control over that, but what we do have control over is how do we react? How do we respond when outside forces come in and impact the markets? But the rebalancing is because we've positioned that from a position of strength. So it's kind of control what you can control, and what we can control is our response. And during normal periods of time, when we have the ability to set our long-term goals, and during times when markets are a little bit more normal, if you will, we can make decisions about how we're going to react when certain events happen. So that's why when we know markets are going to go up, we know markets are going to go down. Unfortunately, there's no way to time when they're going to go up or when they're going to go down. So you hear a lot of times on some of the business channels and some of the different news publications where they really want to sell ratings. You hear people getting all excited because markets are going up, or you hear people panicking because markets are going down. But what we know is that over time, markets go up a lot more than they go down. And we know that over time, if you have a disciplined rebalance approach, you're going to be continuously. Now, we don't necessarily know when that rebalancing is going to take place, but we know if we have plus or minus 5% rule, and that means if the equity portion gets 5% above its target range because stocks are doing good, we rebalance and we lock in those gains. So after a period of time when the markets performed well, we rebalance, we lock in those gains, and we protect those earnings. And vice versa, when we have a period like we saw last year, after the markets have gotten beaten up a little bit, we know they're going to recover. We may not know when the recovery is going to take place. We may not know how long the downturn is going to last, but we do know that over time, markets do go up more than they go down. So by taking advantage of that rebalancing feature again, we're buying stocks when they're a little bit cheap. So instead of having to worry about what volatility is going to do to us in the short term, by having that disciplined approach baked into our process, we've actually turned volatility into our friend, because we're exploiting short-term inefficiencies in the market and making it give our folks like you better returns over the long term. If that makes, does that make sense? Was that?
No. Sounds good.
So far, we've gone through the asset allocation and the equity diversity. A lot of information thrown at you at once real quick, but what questions do you have so far? Anything there yet?
You've answered the questions I wrote on that page.
Okay, sounds good. Last thing I thought I'd touch on there on page 2 was the fixed income diversification there on the right. So the key here is stocks allow you to grow the portfolio and to help you outpace inflation over time. Fixed income is really your ballast, keeps you preserved, keeps things stable when the stock market gyrates, whether it be up or down. So you've got a nice variety of things here, providing you with a nice layer of diversity on the bond side of things as well. You can see the mix there. You've got about 25% of the Orono reserve in individual bonds and CDs. Not that you can time anything perfectly, as Nick said. However, we were able to buy these CDs over the past, year and a half to 2 years, where, you were able to lock in some rates that are closer to 3%. Very hard to get in this day and age. You can't get 0.45%, as Sophie said, unless you invest 5 years or so. So right now you've got a nice mix, nice blend of individual investments here, CDs, bonds that are giving close to 3%, and those mature over the next 3 to 4 years. It's about 150,000 there that come due in the next couple of years. You've got an income fund here. We call it the Dodge and Cox Income Fund. It's funds like this that are going to serve you well in a low rate environment. Dodge and Cox, I can argue, this is one of the best bond fund managers out there. They're able to gobble up a lot of the corporate bonds that are out there before folks like Nick and I can get our hands on them. So it pays to have some active management in here to provide you with a little bit different blend of fixed income, but also somebody that's out there buying up these bonds. You're able to access some things that most people can't. So overall, you're in a good position. We're keeping these relatively short, where we do want rates to climb. As a bond investor, that's ultimately what you want. You want rates to climb. At some point, they will. They already have to some degree. I mean, the 10-year government bond this time last year was as low as 0.4% for 10 years. And now you look at it today, it's creeping up on 1.4%. So it's come up about a full percentage point. But again, you want to be relatively short so that when rates do climb at some point, you can then pivot and earn yourself a higher return. But for now, we're in good shape here, invested in a combination of things to help one, keep things preserved, but to get you some sort of a return in a zero rate environment. Any questions on the bonds or fixed income?
We're all set.
Page 3, basically the same philosophy, the same process. The cemetery fund, the only difference there is the fact that it's geared for more longer term use. You're not pulling money out of this over the next year or two, but it is there for you longer term. So we do have a balanced mix there, about 50% stock, 50% bonds. So you're a little bit more aggressive here. We call this our balance program. Again, the same investment philosophy with buy, rebalance. You do have some other funds in there, some actively managed funds to give you a different flavor. This is done really, really well. If you look at performance for the balance program over the past couple of years, 3 years, it's averaging about 7% a year. 5 years, it's averaged about 10% a year. So, you're getting market-like returns with only half of the cemetery fund invested in stock. So you're in good shape there. We're happy with how things are allocated between both accounts. But before we leave the allocation, any other questions on the cemetery fund? jumping into page 4 on performance, you've got a couple of snapshots there for both. You've got the reserve portfolio on the top where it says Town of Orono. And then on the bottom, you've got the Town of Orono Cemetery. So the way to look at this is from left to right. And this is performance as of the end of January. So, well, the 1-year performance for the reserve fund is about 6.28%. So, you know, with about on average 25% in the stock market, you're getting about 36 to 40% of the broad market. So without even taking on nearly as much as what the market's giving you for risk. Longer term, October, you're up about close to 7%.
Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt. You're on page 6?
Sorry, page 4. With the blue bars.
Bars. No, yes, okay, that's right. That says 5 and 4, sorry. Okay, so yeah, so you mentioned this, why is it the cemetery, oh, well, cemetery 1 year and 3 years, so it did a better return on the 1 year than on the 3 year?
No.
That's right. The 1 year, you're looking at just the cemetery portfolio, right? Yep. That's right. So 1 year, backing this up, January 31st of 2020 through January 31st of this year, you're at 14.6%, where the 3 years giving you an average annual return over that 3-year period. So you're averaging about 7% a year on average with half your money in the stock market. So, you know, if you were to look at this on a cumulative basis, it's going to be a lot higher than 7. This is just your average annual return for the past 3 years.
Still quite high.
Yes, done really, really well with this. Yep, you're getting, if you think about what the broad market, if you were to look at the broad market in general, the S&P 500, that earned about 11.5% over 3 years. So if you consider how much money you have at risk in the cemetery portfolio, you've got about, you know, half the risk, half the money in the stock market, and you're getting, you know, you're in about 7%, which is about 60% of the broad market. So you're doing very well without taking on significant risk.
Yep. Good.
And then, oh, I'm sorry, was there a question?
Nope, just a comment. Looks good.
Okay, thank you. The last couple pages dive into performance a little bit deeper. The page 6 shows you the balance program, which is the cemetery. And then Nick started to dive into the individual fund mix on page 7.
Yeah.
I know you've got a pretty lengthy agenda, but were there additional questions about anything that we discussed?
Any questions, folks? Nope, I think we're good. Very informative, and getting this material in advance has been very helpful to review it before we talk with you folks. And
Yeah,
I was gonna say, you've keyed in on the questions that I had through your presentation.
Yeah, if we could just have one final comment. I know you have a lot on the agenda. This will just take 30 seconds.
Sure, I'll take
But
time.
on page 7, one of the reasons that we preach so much the importance of diversification and having a long-term discipline is, and this chart right here really highlights why that's so important. And if you look at the last 12-month column, which is basically trailing 1 year, and you go down to the green box, the equities, you're going to see a pretty big dispersion of return. You had the Fidelity Large Cap Growth Fund, which was up 65%. And then you have the Small Cap International Strategy, or I'm sorry, the Dodge and Cox International, which was up 6%. They're all investing in good companies. And sometimes the market favors certain companies over others. If you look at the 3-year returns, you're going to see that dispersion between the biggest and the smallest gets tighter. And then if you go out to 5-year, again, you're going to see that dispersion of return gets a little bit tighter, and so forth. We stop at 10 years, but if this chart were wider and we could go out 15 and 20, you'd see that dispersion of return continue to get tighter across the board. And that's why we feel it's so important to have such a well-balanced, diversified portfolio. And because of those anomalies in pricing, where sometimes maybe, last year tech companies were in favor. Other years, Dodge and Cox Stock Fund, they invest in a lot of the big dividend payers, a lot of your, I think Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson, household names. They're great companies too. They were just out of favor last year for whatever reason by the market. So that's why we really preach the importance of having that long-term discipline and doing the systematic rebalancing to take advantage of those mispricings.
Folks, any questions that anybody has for our experts here? Having been on the council
Sophie,
for
I
a number.
wanted to mention,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
I was just going to say, Sophie, I'm going to send you some forms to update if your the allocations that were reviewed tonight are still in order. We just update our documentation every few years. So I'll send that out in the mail to you in the next few days. Thank you.
I was just going to say that having been on the council, I think now for 15 years, I really appreciate the very informative presentations that you folks make. I feel that we have a much better understanding of what our investments are doing now, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
You're
It's
welcome.
our pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for your business.
Sophie, did you have something you want to say?
I just wanted to follow up to say, when we went out and we looked at who we should be investing with, the council spent a lot of time looking for just the right qualities. And Pete, Nazarene and their team, just amazing to work with, and really willing to answer questions and to help us understand our portfolio and where we need to go, but also happy to help us remember that it's not what's happening on a given day or week, but long term. I think the town chose very well with these advisors and look forward to continuing to make some money.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that, Sophie, and it's our pleasure.
Thank you.
For you, if you have any needs at all, happy to help.
We appreciate your time. Thank you again.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for your
much.
time. Have a good night.
Hope
Take
Good
care.
night.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was good, very informative. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is Council FY22 Budget Priorities Survey Development. And I'm sure that is Sophie.
It is, and this part of the agenda is definitely, hopefully, a little bit more give and take and less meaty with numbers. So when we talked about the budget timeline, we also talked about the fact that this budget is going to reflect some changes in priorities in terms of trying to put some things back in the budget. When I look at priorities in the coming year, if we're going to stay on the track we were on before, this is a year that we would be looking at trying to find some expansion within the Parks and Rec program, and working what we're seeing now in a couple of different places in our salary. Our wage scale is that we think we might be off in some places. Bell's doing some research for us right now to be able to bring back a potential shift in the pay scale, especially at the lower end of our pay scale. So I have some things that are priorities. We've talked about trying to manage an ongoing commitment to infrastructure, public works infrastructure, to to stay in that $800,000 range. So that I plan to put in the budget. One of the things that I've noticed though is that it's awful easy to get keyed into line items, and the council tends to be able to respond a little bit better when I have a more robust discussion of options and concerns and areas that we might want to highlight for a discussion around service level. And so my thought had been to kind of pre-ask some of those questions. So when I put the budget together, I could be a little proactive with that. So that was kind of my idea. So I went out and did some research around surveys around budget priorities. And I didn't like what I found because they tended to be, if you have $1 or if you have $100, how would you want to divvy that up to spend it? And quite honestly, I can tell you how much it costs to meet a service level. I can't tell you if you say I want to spend 50 cents on the library, that doesn't tell me what you want the library to look like. And so for me, it would be very helpful if we could frame this survey more in service level. I thought if I took the OMRs, those first few pages that you see with each departmental budget that talk about the resources in the department, the goals of the department, the things they do to try to meet those goals. If I took those pieces and tried to summarize them a little bit more, and then talked about the question being, this is what we spent last year. This is what, would you want to spend more? Would you want to increase service level? Would you want to decrease service level? And if you want to do that, what does it look like? There would be a couple where it would be a little bit more complicated, and those would be in departments either that are in major flux because of COVID-19. So I think about Parks and Rec and the library, that I think we're going to have to do some overlap planning for if COVID-19 continues and if it suddenly all goes away, kind of what that might look like. And the other one would be the departments that had a lot of cuts made to them. I've got to explain to you what those cuts coming back in to the budget would look like for service level, existing service level kind of proposed, which would get us back to FY20. And then kind of, are you looking for more? Are you looking for less? Are you looking for special projects or priorities? And even if they don't make it into my cut of the budget, they can make it into the discussion section so that when you're going through the budget, you see it right in front of you. You don't have to remember that you wanted to talk about whatever it might be, automatic car chargers or electric car chargers, or what we're going to do with Penobscot Street, or any number of those kind of conversations. But my thought, working with Belle, we're thinking that the way to do this would be with like a Survey Monkey, so that we can easily and behind the scenes put the information together, so that you'd be able to see 7 counselors responded, 3 of them like the service level, 4 of them want to see more. They want to see more in the town manager's office. They, whatever that might look like. You want me to hire an HR person, which I know you wouldn't. But I think it will help me frame the budget document better. I don't think you necessarily want to see the budget numbers reflecting all of that, but it will help me pull together, I think, for a more efficient budgeting process. But wanted to talk with you a little bit about what you think. And you guys are really good at me coming in with an idea and then you saying, oh, that's great, and then making something completely different that's much better. So it's kind of where I am.
I think that I mean, I think this is going to be really helpful for everybody in the process. And I like the idea that you've laid out there. It will give, clearly there are going to be a lot of things that you're going to present to us and say, listen, we probably need to make this adjustment. And it doesn't matter if it aligns with you. I mean, you can ultimately say no, council, but like whether it aligns with your imagined desires or not, like this is probably a necessary thing that we have to do. And that's your job to give us that good advice. But I think it would also be helpful for you to have a sense going in of, you know, where our priorities fall. And I like the way that you presented it. The only thing that I would want to maybe add is space for a narrative component, because I think it's very cool, the idea to be able to see like, okay, 3 counselors think the service level is adequate and 2 counselors would like to see it be higher or lower. I think that's also great for us to see where everyone is kind of falling. But I think that one of the things that we're always trying to do individually as counselors is to find that balance between the things that we know are important priorities or that can wait versus the things that we know our constituents are very passionate about and don't think can wait. And we're trying to like find the right responsible balance there. So I think it would be helpful to have, we don't have to write a novel, but like at least a small narrative component to say like, listen, I understand the budget's going to be tight, but I know that the community is really focused on this particular priority. And it would be good to try to find a way to honor that commitment in some way, even if it's not as much as people would like to see, that we can make a gesture towards something because we know it's a community priority. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so in a couple of places, we've identified things that we think council should consider, not necessarily do, but it's a service level question, not a staff operation question. So let me give you an example. One of the things that you're going to hear from Rob St. Louis, Jeff Lowe, and me is that we went from having a public health nurse to giving a small pot of money for donations to regional social service providers to then holding it after the Grand Rat response that cost a lot of money to now we hold it and we use it for that kind of thing. We're talking about like $5,000, so not very much. One of the things that Jeff and I are talking about is expanding our ability to respond to public health emergencies and what that might look like. And it will cost some money. It will take a resource. But that's something that we think council should consider. If you say no, we've made it work. We can continue to make it work. We don't think the answer is to bring a public health nurse on. We would, I think the answer is to try to work more with the city of Bangor and its public health department, but also some internal folks in the community that can help us identify people with needs. We see a real gap in our framework for helping people who have needs. So that is an issue. Parks and Recs, as we look at expanding our programming, which has been on our plan, that costs money. And one of the issues we have is around space. So Councilor Perry is going to help us with some of that, but we're also going to come back to you with kind of multiple options and depending on what service level you're looking for. So my thought.
Excuse me. You said one of your issues are around space. What do you mean by that?
In space to hold Parks and Rec programs inside. So basketball, can't really do basketball in the parking lot.
We had a
That
long
kind of
history.
thing.
We've had a long history of working with the school department on space, and that has not worked out as well the last few years as it had in the past. And we're going to try to see if we can't address that with the school.
So we are kind of looking at things that are outside of our normal budget. My thought is if we could, towards the end, kind of get some sense of council's appetite, and questions or concerns they might have, so we can address those. And quite honestly, if council's appetite was absolutely not, then I probably wouldn't put it in the budget if I just knew that I had 7 counselors that thought it was a great idea, but would never do it in Orono. So I like the idea of the narrative. Are you talking about one narrative at the end or a narrative block for each question?
Oh, I was talking about counselors being
Yeah.
able to contribute. Yeah, so just, I don't think it needs to be for every, well, actually, I don't know. Now that you think, I was more thinking of it as one narrative, like, I know, I know that the community, this is just an example I'm pulling out of thin air, but like, I know that community members have been very focused recently on Parks and Rec programming for children, for example.
Yep.
And to have room to just talk about that in the big picture. But now that you're mentioning it, it's like, well, okay, but should there be a spot for there to be just a sentence or two about every section, and to say, like, I understand that the priorities are organized this way, but I also know that folks are very concerned about sidewalk clearing or something.
I think it would make a lot more sense to have some small space for every section, personally. And I think the other thing that's going to help us do is when we get to reviewing budgets, that information is going to be right there so that we can have a discussion on things that haven't been resolved. I think sometimes when we've gone through the budget, we get all the way through it, and then we think, oh, we didn't talk about X, Y, Z. And now things are pretty firmed up, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in going back and talking about X, Y, Z. But if we can do that as we're going through the budget, I think it's going to be it might be a longer process, but I think it's going to be a better process.
And are you guys fine with that being like a Survey Monkey? So you'd get a link for it, you'd go on the link, you'd fill it out, and we would see who it is and, or not. The thing I like about being able to see who it is, Tom, is if somebody says something I don't understand, I can pick up the phone and talk with them.
Oh, I don't have any problem at all with knowing if
Would you rather get
gets it.
would you prefer a paper copy?
Does that make it a lot more difficult for you folks to deal with? There might be some of us who would prefer paper and some of us who wouldn't. I would prefer paper.
So I think if there was a good mix and there were 4 people who were happy on the computer, it would make it worth it, because then we only have to hand enter a couple, and hand entering does not take a lot of time. So I think if we had 1 or 2 folks that preferred paper, that would not be the end of the universe. If in general folks were okay with the electronic format, it makes whatever we can preload. Yeah, and just so you know, I'm gonna ask Belle to do most of the work here. I'll come up with some questions and some content, and she'll create it, so that will work.
I think it's good.
All right, so my plan is to have the survey ready to drop after the election on the 9th, and leave it open for about a week so that people can work on it, and then take that information, lay it in with our budget, that hopefully we're still on track to get you the budget by mid-April.
Lori, did you want to raise a question?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to know, is there a possibility you could put this out for people in the community to answer these questions, and they would be in a separate database so that we would see what other people in the community are saying to the very same questions?
So in my research, I found several community surveys, Lori. I don't, I think if we want to do that, we should be looking to drop it next summer to pull the information together. I don't know that there is enough turnaround for a week or two for that to be meaningful. And the community surveys I've seen have been focused a little bit differently. They're more on the very general kind of questions back and forth, not expecting you to have an inside information. So, I mean, I think if we want to talk to people about general citizen desires regarding service level, City of South Portland just did a nice survey on that, but it's a different, I think it's a different tool. That if council wants to do that, that would be a wonderful thing to do. We would want an outside group to help us so that we got statistically relevant questions.
I don't
So
think
that's
that,
what Portland was. Portland's was a consultant that organized theirs.
Yes,
I think it
South
would be
Portland.
really useful information down the road at some point. I don't think it needs to be every single budget season, but I think that occasionally it would be good for the town to check in that way. And again, using an outside consultant to make sure that it is a good cross section of the community and not just the folks who feel motivated to respond for whatever reason. When it comes to the budget, however, my feeling is that that this is how democracy works. I mean, they elect us, hopefully knowing that we come here with an understanding of what community needs are and the willingness to listen. So I feel very comfortable engaging in the budget process, knowing that I'm bringing information from the community as everyone else is. And I know that there are plenty of people who aren't shy about reaching out as well if I'm not accurately representing their wants and needs. So I'm comfortable, not going into some community survey for the budget season. But I do think that down the road, it would be good to check in on the service level.
I agree.
The reason that I knew what the City of South Portland had done is because I've had a conversation with their city manager. I'm looking at a bigger survey that talks about service level and satisfaction with services. And they've used that as a way to get to some of these equity questions, social and racial equity. So I think it is a bigger question, and it's one that staff is already grappling with. And in the budget, you probably will see some funds for an outside consultant to help build that. It's just too easy to skew with the questions to get to make the tool not as useful.
Great. Sounds like a plan.
Would you, well, we won't be coming back together as a full committee. Would you guys like to see the survey tool before it goes out? Or are you just gonna go with it?
The way the questions are asked, it helps influence the answers. So maybe just in like any document, having other people edit it, although we all probably come in with similar biases, we have been working together and have our way of looking at things. It might be useful to have more eyes review it. So if you sent it to us in between meetings before you sent it out so that we can make comments. Well, none of us are professionals in asking questions to get the broad answers, but that seems like that might be one tool to be closer at reviewing it before it goes out.
Yeah,
Okay.
while I completely trust your work and your ability to do your work, and I don't think of this as like editing or anything like that. The only reason I would want to maybe take a quick look at it is to just think about new incoming counselors and how the language is presented. In terms of, if you're walking in off the street with very little knowledge of how budget a budget process works. And so I think sometimes it's hard for extremely efficient and dedicated municipal employees such as yourself to remember what it's like to not understand what the heck's going on. So I would love to just take a quick look at it just
Yeah.
to say, hey, this might not make sense to someone who's new or.
So understand, I don't often say, would you like to pre-look at my work? So when I do offer, it's because I think it might be a good idea. Although you can pre-look, you can ask whenever.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
We are.
And our next item is review of monthly financial reports, and we have lots of information.
So,
You want-
Tom, I don't know how you want to do this. If you want to go in order with your packet, would that be the easiest?
Yes,
And-
I think it would. And I guess what I'm interested in is highlights that you see, and if any of us have any questions on items, we can raise them as well.
So, when we look at the revenue, which is our first report, we're actually looking very good on the revenue side. The real estate property taxes, if you've been paying attention, you will see that we keep walking those back, and that's because of abatements. We had a prior period adjustment, abatement from an agreed upon settlement with CD Park 7 that we applied and hit in this year. So $52,000 of the $69,000 shortfall is actually an abatement. It was not a refunded abatement, meaning we didn't see the cash go out the door, but it is on paper a reduction in the revenue that we booked. Am I?
Mhm.
That can, okay. So the road subsidy is came in well above what we had anticipated from the state. If you recall, we knew that the state was going to be lower than the previous year. So we usually had budgeted right around $70,000 to $75,000 for road subsidy. We were not sure what that number was going to look like. It has come in lower than previous years, but not as much as we had put in the budget. At the beginning of the meeting, we talked about revenue sharing. So we get revenue sharing on the 20th of each month. It's deposited electronically into our bank account. And so we got notice of it and booked it this morning. We received for February $224,614.52. That is $100,556.75 more than what I had predicted based on our budget that we would bring in. We are actually trending well ahead of the actual well ahead of our budget projection. So understand, this projection is me taking the total number, looking at our trends and kind of trending out what I would think if we were going to meet the budget, where we would be each month. At this point, we're $610,000 ahead of where I would have thought we would be. That is not to say we are $610,000 ahead of the final budget, because we have no guarantee that we'll get what we'll get for money coming in. But we have met the budget. We're right now we're about $150,000 more than what we budgeted for the annual budget. So we had hoped this would happen, right? We had hoped that we would bring the money in, that we would get more than what we settled on for the budget. And this will go a long way to help build fund balance back and meet some of the goals that the rating agencies gave us to maintain our excellent credit. So a lot there, but revenue share is looking good. We are also doing quite well on the excise, motor vehicle excise tax. It is slowing down a little bit, so we're going to keep our eyes there. But I think we're doing very well with that. Ambulance fees.
Could you read the 4-digit numbers when you read these? Because
Yep.
sometimes I know exactly where you are, and other times I'm looking
Yep.
around the page and it's blurry.
13 on page 9, 13 charges for service, 4221 ambulance fees. We've been watching this. Still trending behind where we would like to be this time of year, because this ambulance fees do not come in for us in a linear way. It's not chopped up into equal increments. We would have liked to see us having brought in closer to 65 to 70% of our revenue at this point. So that is behind. You will notice as we look at disposal site fees, 4231, recycling revenues, 4232, landfill permit revenue, 4235. That tells me that we've got a mix up in our receipting pathway, where I've got 5298 that has been collected on a zero budget. So I have that on my list to talk to Paul, to talk to Rob and Shelley about.
Connie, that's my house. Don't worry.
All right. The senior center rent, and just the rec rentals and programming, we are not going to meet budget there, and we would expect that. You notice under interest earnings, which is subset 15, that we're doing very well both on our investment earnings, which is the first line. That's what we get from the bank, and our 4402 is where we book the market gains and losses on our investments. So that's the portfolio that you just talked about. So the fact that it's blue is a wonderful thing. It means we don't plan on any market gains or losses because we don't realize them. It's a way for you to track what we have brought in, or what the growth or the loss in the investment portfolios are. This is only for the reserve fund, that's general fund.
Right.
Cemetery would show in the cemetery fund, which is further on in the budget. Cemetery investment earnings, 764410, and you see where we've booked about a $48,000 gain. So we like that. We'll keep that going, hopefully.
Yep.
Joe is doing very well in his shop. We rebounded some of our consumption, which is good. The Tiff Funds, we made so normally I move the program development funds after we bill out the first installment of property taxes. So when people's tax bills go out, I move in our general fund the amount of money that we're supposed to move into the program development funds, which is the sheltered tax for the year. This year, given our cash flow issues and concerns about how fast revenue would come in, I elected to push it out to the tax due date is when I moved the first half, and I just moved the second half last week. So that looks a little different, or can look a little different.
So if we could you just take one example and walk us through it, or walk us through it. I'm always a little confused on these TIF funds.
Okay, so let's look at, we're in Fund 83. About a third of the way, a quarter of the way down on page 11 of your packet.
Mhm.
If you look at 60, the downtown transit-oriented TIF,
Yep.
we captured $711,972.92. That is what, on paper, we sheltered from taxes. And so it had
For
to go
this
into
year.
for this year, and
Yep.
it went into the program. Then if you look at the budget, where it says use of program development funds, that is what balances what we said we were going to use out of the TIF fund. So we will allow those program development funds to sit, and this year we're using more than what we're putting back in to the fund.
We're using more than so 711,000 was what we realized this year.
Yep, so we had 800,000 or $600,000 or $800,000 in there at the end of last year
Okay,
as a balance. We're gonna add another 700 and take out $1 million. And some of that had to do with projects, capital projects that we had chosen to fund.
and that leaves what in there's a balance of that fund, the 309?
No, I can get you that information.
Okay, it's just not on there.
Yes, just not on here. This is just revenue in. I
Gotcha.
do a spreadsheet for you during the budget where I talk about all the expenses that you've approved that can come out, the revenue that's going in, and subtracting it from the balance that was
Yep.
already there, and giving you a projection
Okay.
for where we'll end the year.
Great.
That work?
That does, and thank you.
So on the revenue side, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, that we have some revenue lines that are way overperforming, and we have some that are way underperforming. And we kind of thought that that would happen when we put the budget together. My inclination would be to have you not adjust the budget, and instead just explain it when we get to the council, when we get to the audit process under the stewardship, that instead of changing to a higher revenue sharing number and reducing the places that where it's not coming in, I'd rather just show the variance.
Yep.
If you're okay with that.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
That's a truer picture.
Yeah. So when I look at expenses, our expenses are kind of in the same place. There are some places where we put money in thinking that we would be out of COVID by now, and that we're just not needing it for that. But other places that we are really seeing a hit. So software for computers, hardware for computers, training, we're seeing.
Jesus.
The good news is that our training is, we're able to offer people the ability to do more training. They're doing a lot more remote training, which is great, but it costs us money. And I think when we put the budget together, we were just assuming we weren't going to be sending people to training. So you'll see some overages there. Legal fees are higher than normal across the board. So when you get to code enforcement, we've had a couple of enforcement actions that have cost a lot of money for legal fees. We've way overexpended that. On the revenue side, you haven't seen it yet, but we are gonna book a revenue. We are reaching an agreement with a property owner on a sizable, we're resolving it with a consent decree with a $14,000 fine. So it will offset some of that legal cost that you see there. You won't see it in the line. It will offset on the revenue side. Having to work through some issues with the labor unions around COVID and around operations and around our split with splitting the police department into with a community services division has cost money. And if you look, you'll see I've dialed back some of my professional services to try to offset some of those other expenses in other lines. The biggest expense that you should definitely know about is our workers' comp premium. So our workers' comp premium hovered around $100,000. We had an incredibly good experience rating, which dropped us to an unnaturally low workers' comp premium, which is a wonderful thing. It really is when you can walk around with a experience rating of 0.6. Unfortunately, we had a couple of large workplace claims, and those claims have resulted in an increase in the mod rating to 1.06. So the bill that we got for so the workers' comp year goes from January 1st to December 31st. The bill that we got was for $130,000, so it's a $30,000 increase. I did not have the money in the budget to pay for that. So I have asked workers' comp and received approval to spread the payment out over 2 fiscal years. So their insurance year falls in 2 of our fiscal years. So it would be FY21 and then the first half of FY22. When I got the bill, I could have put us way in the hole with FY21, but given the fact that we don't know what's on the horizon for COVID, I contacted them and asked them if we could spend out the rest of our budget for this year and front load or back load the payment for next year. So that's going to mean in FY22, we're going to see a significant increase in the workers' comp premium line. So the I think given that we are in a pandemic, it's always good for us to look at general assistance, which is on page 15 of your packet, and it's sub-account 15. We seem to be doing very well when it comes to rent and even heat assistance. What is account 953? We are way over budget, and that's because we've had to pay for 2 burials. So that can be a cremation or they tend to be cremains, but the state caps what we have to spend, but it's still a pretty expensive endeavor. You'll notice throughout the report, we have COVID overtime lines. Those are expenses are put there that we believe will be reimbursed by federal emergency management. So the reason that there is no budget there is because we believe there will be an offsetting. And if there isn't, then it's just going to have to be absorbed by the general budget line. Police department is doing fairly well. You see some red places, red lines in the budget. Fire department, we continue on the same trend that we talked about last time, which is overrunning unscheduled overtime, vacation coverage, and sick coverage. And some of that has to do with the individual who is on workers' comp. We had 2 out at the same time for a while. Luckily, one is back, the other one remains out. As we keep looking at that, Chief Lowe is trying to dial back expenses as much as he can and still maintaining a safe quality and fire and EMS services. Other than that,
Okay. Sophie?
yeah,
So we are hoping that 19,753 COVID overtime is hopefully going to get paid through FEMA.
yes.
Good.
So I don't know if Belle wants to speak to that or not. She's managing that grant. We're not.
There she is.
So we have submitted 2 projects and we're working on a 3rd project for FEMA. They're all going to be reimbursed at 100% versus 85%, which is typical for FEMA projects because you get 75 from the feds and 10 or 15 from the state, depending on how they reimburse. The projects that the 3rd project that we're getting ready to submit has the bulk of those overtime hours in it. And that was the result of kind of multiple exposures that we had in public safety. And the project manager that I work with tells me that they're all approved expenses and that there shouldn't be any issue with getting those submitted and reimbursed. It's just a matter of getting it done.
Thank you, Bill.
That is when you get to the capital infrastructure line. I've got to sit with Connie because the drainage for Chapel Road and College Heights, which looks like a $5,700 unbudgeted expense, is a bond expense. So it's in the wrong fund. And with what you approved at the last council meeting, we're all set to create the budgets and move some of those expenses. I just took a vacation and Connie would like me to actually do my job and approve those before we book them. Same with some of the debt. We had talked about whether or not we wanted to move debt around to cover, or if we wanted to just leave it to reflect the new bond the refinancing and the new bond amortization schedule. Connie and I are still going back and forth with Bob about that to see whether or not we want to adjust the budgets or not. So that's where savings and the 2. So in your debt service line, you'll see we are very specific. It is for the principal for the Gorham Savings Bank, USDA 2014 town refinance, or the 2014 general obligation bond for the Public Works Department. We're extremely specific about that. So then when we went and floated bonds in October, it completely changed the amortization schedules. We're trying to just figure out from for forward thinking, if it makes more sense to restructure the budget within debt, so there's no red, or to just show we underperformed for 2014, we underexpensed for 2014, we overexpensed for the 2020. You'll see it nets to still having an under expense for the line. So I'm not 100% sure what I want to do there. And I need to look at the MMA pool insurance. I think we have, it's a allocation issue. I just was on vacation and did not have time to look into that. And you'll notice under, on page 29, under the reserve fund, 21, 700, 240 shows expense of $1,438.61. We decided, just want to remind folks that we decided not to pull any budget or not to create any kind of budget for unemployment. Normally we would appropriate $5,000 a year for that. Because we're a self-pay, we decided as a cost-saving measure not to do that and to pull directly from the reserve fund. So as of the end of January, we had a little over $1,400 worth of claims. We've had more in February, and we will continue to see. Bell has reissued our request to be reimbursed for the $5,000 that we had to pay out, that we appealed and was upheld for us. I say the state owes us. The state says they don't owe us. We're still fighting about that. And in general, you see the grant funds. For the Keep Maine Healthy grant and the FEMA grant, we are not putting budgets in those because we would be chasing that constantly, and it works better to lay them against the revenue that we get to make sure that the revenue and the expenses match at the end of the period. And that is all I have for the expense budget. And again, I think we're on target. I think we've underspent in many places and we've had to overexpend in some other places. And I think we should not adjust the budget to reflect that. I think we should let it reflect the uncertainty of the times. And you received the motor vehicle excise tax report. So that shows that we're on target, just as we kind of talked about. And I shared with you updated numbers for revenue sharing.
Yep.
And they put revenue 1 and 2 in for you.
Yep.
You guys don't normally pay attention to which pool of money that comes in from, if it's just because we're a municipality or because we're a service center municipality, which is what Rev 2 is.
Right.
So cash flow, this is one of my favorite times of the year. As we go up to the second round of tax payments, we have approximately $10 million on hand, which makes me happy. I like that. We have even more today. You'll notice that once again, we had a reasonable level of activity with 127 journals being posted and 0 out of balance or expense or control errors. So staff is doing a very good job. They are meticulous. And tax collection is going to look a lot different if I ran this very same report for you today. We brought in a lot of cash over the counter in the last 2.5 weeks. But you will see that we are on target in terms of being 63% collected before we even got to the beginning of February, and taxes were due on February 11th. Our WPCF billed receivables is so high because we had just put a billing out. So people didn't have a chance to make payments on it when the report was run. So that's what I've got, and always happy to answer questions.
Thank you for that. And any further questions on that, on the financial reports? I think we're all set there.
It was extremely thorough.
Very thorough. And moving on to brief town manager's update.
Excellent. So a couple of things. First, letting you know that we're transitioning some staff back from remote back to the office. I can't fit everybody in at town hall. Some people are doing a couple of days here and a couple of days at home, where we're taking one office and splitting it between two people. I am very excited to report that Belle, we have gotten the okay with numbers trending down, that Belle will be back in her space,
Great.
hopefully tomorrow or Wednesday, which I don't know, my sanity needs that. So the other piece, as we look ahead, I'm getting ready. I thought I would send out an email to all council candidates, letting them know that we plan to have our organizing meeting the Monday after the election. Plan to do that at 5 o'clock, like all the rest of our meetings, on Zoom. My hope is to run us through in summary form the orientation manual, so that we're all a refresher on kind of how council works, give that to people in advance. Have Belle do a very brief stormwater training, and we have enough people that are, we will have 2 brand new people. I really
At
want
least.
to do at least 2, sorry. I would very much like to do a brief BOA training. So my thought is, if I tell everybody up front, this is the day, please make sure you can attend and run people through those trainings. I know it will be a little bit repetitive to the remaining members, but I think it would be important. So if you're okay with that, I thought I would go back through the orientation manual, and if there are any factual issues, work with Councilor Perry to adjust that work, and then get it back out to everybody right after the election, so everybody has hard copies of it. All right.
Good.
The other piece is we received some really interesting data, a summary table from the Economic Policy Institute or Center that talked about council, received that, and it gave out some kind of interesting information. I did a little bit of research just because it's always helpful to know where numbers come from. And I don't think that there is anything wrong with the report in macro terms. It jives with other things that we see. The concern I have with the report is that the foundation, so that was a household pulse survey from the US Census Bureau. They sent it out in May and June, trying to quantify the impact of COVID-19. They were looking for a 5%, national 5% response rate. So based on our population, that would mean they would hope to get about 65,000 responses from the state of Maine. They received 3,837 responses. So I think the general idea of where they're going probably isn't off. And if you notice, it didn't really conflict with what Dave was talking about with our local economy. I would not want counselors to necessarily use those data points as, if you're formally, I guess is what I'm saying, because I'm not sure that they are statistically relevant. Am I making sense?
Yep.
And I just wanted to make sure that you didn't get caught with that.
But you're saying that they got the information from the US Census that they're presenting.
They did, from a pulse survey, that it represents 0.3% response rate for the state of Maine. So I think, like I said, I think the data is not necessarily wrong. I just wouldn't want you guys quoting it to support formal policy discussions, because I'm
They were
not sure
targeting a
statistically
point-
relevant.
They were targeting a 0.5% response rate.
No, a 5.0% response rate. So, other than that, I'm back at my desk. So if you need anything, you know where to find me.
Sophie, one question I had, the audit.
So Casey has it back from technical review. He was planning to have it bound and sent to me this week. My plan is to send it out to the hard copy out to counselors. And my hope was that on Monday, the 8th of March, we could meet with Casey either at 4:30. If you think you want a half an hour, 4:30 to 5. If you think you want an hour, meet at 4. For you guys to ask questions and get the general audit. And then kind of regardless what the audit says, you're kind of in a position you have to accept it. It's
Right.
not really a choice. And so I would still put the acceptance of the audit on the March agenda so that we can publish the audit and have it.
Sounds good.
All right.
Any other business to come before the group this evening? Well, then thank you for being here, and we will see you shortly. Au revoir.
Thanks very much.